Greetings, everyone. P. Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another episode of In the Prog Seat. We've got a fun show planned for you here today. This is kind of like the sequel to an exact same show I've already done with the folks in the Hudson Valley Squares. That's albums that define our tastes in music, and everybody can interpret it as they will, basically picking out albums that represents kind of what you like about music, the different genres you like about music, one album for each style or however you want to do it. 5 picks for everybody. And let me introduce the crew here. We're waiting on Louis Nasser. Hopefully he'll join soon. We got Chris Canzaneri in the house. Ken Golden is here. Eric Porter's here. Chad Hutchinson. And George Lemie. What's happening, folks?
Hey.
How's it going?
How's it going?
It's going. So as we did on the squares, everybody will go through their 5 picks on each turn round, and then feel free for the rest of the panel to ask questions and comment on their picks and, ask for further explanations and all that good stuff. So we're going to start the same way I just introduced everybody. So Cans, we'll have you go first.
Okay. I know some people were saying this was tough. I thought it was going to be tough, and then I kind of decided to attack this from stuff that I got into when I was at a young age and certain things that may have led me down a certain road that led to other things that were like what I had or whatever. So I kind of wrapped a few different facets of my taste into a couple of these, but not this one. This is pretty damn straightforward. This is one of the first albums I ever bought with my own money. Blizzard of Oz by this guy named Ozzy Osbourne, who had just left Black Sabbath. I didn't know that when I got this. I was like, oh, this guy's great. And then they were like, well, he was in another band called Black Sabbath. You might like them. So, of course, this got me into Black Sabbath. This got me into all kinds of heavy music that was coming out at that time. Stuff like Rush, stuff like Led Zeppelin. And this was like a doorway, AC/DC, a doorway to everything that was kind of new and heavy in 1980. So that was the first one. Next one, this album also came out in 1980, and this is the Kinks' One for the Road. This could have been almost any live album of that era. Could have been a live. At the time, I only had a live on tape, and I only had like 3/4 of the album. This is an incredible album if you like just straightforward rock and roll. Every one of their classics on here is heavier than the original. It is all presented, just bang, 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 one night, one concert. I'm pretty sure it was one concert. Now that I said that, it might not have been. But
I think it is safe for like 1 or 2 songs. I think they interjected a couple from another. Yeah. But yeah, for the most part, it's one show.
But, straightforward hard rock. And this led me to, 60s music stuff. I was like, well, and Led Zeppelin too, actually, because people, told me that, hey, Jimmy Page played the solo on All Day and All the Night. And I was like, oh, Jimmy Page, oh, cool. And, this put me into English music, sort of, but definitely 60s music and live albums, and there's a million of them. This one is special. If you've never heard this, check it out, because it's not really what you would think of when you think of the Kinks if you've never heard it. So,
Chris, you ever see the Kinks?
No, unfortunately. My concert going experience is slim, unfortunately.
I saw them a couple of times, and Dave Davis got into a fist fight with Mick Avery. It's pretty funny.
I thought he hated his brother too. I thought there was all kinds of tensions and bad blood in that band. So. But they sounded great on that album.
They couldn't do an encore. And Ray came out for the encore, and he went up to the mic and he said something like the Kinks remain the Kinks or something like that.
Cool. No, they had a big reputation for that. So, all right, on to my third pick. Close to the edge. Yes. What's up, Luis?
What's going on, guys?
Hey, Louis.
Hey, brother.
I'm trying to understand this new thing that you assholes decided to use.
It's a lot like the old thing.
Yeah, except that it's not streamlined for whatever reason. So I have to I literally have to sit right next to the router.
That sucks.
It's fine.
Yeah. All right.
Let's not bitch about this. I'm sorry.
Hey, show must go on.
Exactly.
So, Close to the Edge, number 3. This started me down the road of listening to progressive rock and roll. And I got this when I was fairly young. So I didn't really understand what the hell was going on for most of this album. You know, I put it on, I listened to it. It took me years to really get into it. But when I did, I was like, oh, okay. You know, and this started me down the road on prog music. Number 4. Magic Touch by Stanley Jordan.
Wow.
This I got the year it came out. I read all about this guy in the guitar magazines. You know, you can almost see him doing his technique here. He tapped with both hands. He could play 2 parts at once. You know, it was all very hyped at the time. I didn't know what kind of music this was until I got this. And this album really got me into jazz eventually. You know, it was produced by some guy named Al Di Meola, who plays cymbals on this, you know, which is really his thing. But that got me thinking, well, who's Al Di Meola? And maybe I'll check him out too. There's a few standards on here, you know, Around Midnight and stuff like that. What else? Freddie Freeloader. You know, this is like classic jazz stuff. I looked into who those songs were by. And when you bought a Blue Note album back in the old days, and maybe still, I haven't bought one on vinyl in forever, but you got the Blue Note story, you know, and this is very interesting. History of the label, interesting stuff about jazz. And this, you know, started me down the road of listening to jazz. Although I bought a lot of contemporary stuff at around this time that just stunk. There's really a lot of bad shit from the 80s. And that delayed my appreciation of good jazz music by a few years. I can think of one band called Special Effects that I particularly despised. But I bought 2 albums by them when I saw them in the store, and I've lost them since. And fuck them. Hate them. I'm sure there's some fans listening or watching.
Daly Minucci is a pretty good guitar player. I think their first
the album I had that I listened to did not have any guitar. It was all just very 80s. You remember that show with John Tesh there? You know, something that entertainment show, Entertainment Tonight, I think it's called, actually. Yeah. It sounded like the theme song to that, you know, which was, I'm sure, written by Tesh, which was, you know, just anodyne, fucking bland 80s tinkle tinkle jazz, whatever. Anyway, years later, I, you know, listened to the Blue Note story and got into something a lot better than all that crap. And then finally, this album sent me down the road into listening to extreme metal. This isn't extreme metal per se, but for the time it came out, I only had Peace Cells, which, you know, is pretty fucking heavy. But this is an amazing album, and this was like an eye opener for me, and sent me down several different roads of metal that I hadn't listened to before, that the Ozzy Osbourne album didn't send me down. And now I'm here, and all those albums turned me into the asshole that I am today. Now you know why.
I love it.
Anybody have any questions for Chris on those picks? There's some interesting stuff there.
What's an album that almost made your list?
Yeah, like I said, Kiss Alive could have taken the place of the Kinks album. But at the time, you know, like I said, I didn't have it. So
when you talk about the Kinks album, I'm sorry I'm late, but are you talking about One for the Road?
You know it.
What? That's a fucking masterpiece. I love
it.
That.
It is.
Yeah.
Killer record.
Yep.
Yeah, we played that to death back in the day. That was a lot of fun. I remember me and Tim Morash used to talk about and listen to that constantly together. That's really good live album. Really, and it's amazing how much more energetic most of those live versions are than some of the studio counterparts. I mean, nothing wrong with the studio versions, but something about that lineup.
I think the Kinks in '83 were like at their peak moment.
Yeah,
performance.
They had like a really weird career because they had like a renaissance late in their career.
Yeah, right. Destroyer came out and it was like, okay, they recycled the riff and had an even bigger hit than the first song.
I remember seeing them. I saw them at the Nassau Coliseum. I mean,
what year was Come Dancing? Was that like 83? Somewhere in there? I remember them on
No, that was 84.
Okay.
I think that one came out with State of Confusion. That album. Yeah. I love those records. I love that era for the Kinks.
It's funny because when I talk to folks from the UK, they don't like any of those late 70s, early 80s albums all that much. The only Kinks stuff that they hold in high regard is like the mid-late 60s and early 70s stuff.
Oh, the Village Green Preservation, that sort of thing.
Muswell Hillbillies, stuff like that.
Yeah. Preservation and all those, yeah. And I like them too, but you know, they just don't understand that here in the US we didn't really embrace the Kinks until they became like an arena rock band.
Yeah. So
many of us, that's the albums we gravitate towards, but to a lot of people, longtime Kinks fans, and from over there, they're like, that's not classic Kinks.
That's too bad.
Yeah, what are you gonna do?
But another almost sorry to extend my time here, but another one that almost made it. I had the Rush Archives set, which I didn't feel like I could count it as one album, but I had that set of the first 3 albums, and that got just about worn out. So, first 3 Rush albums,
can't go wrong with those.
Nope.
Ken, we'll have you go next, but if you could do me a favor, what microphone do you have selected?
I have the iMac mic,
switch it to the other one, yeah, because you sound like you're underwater or something.
Really, it was funny because the last time we switched and everybody.
I know. That's why I was like, I wonder what he's got selected. Because
I will try it. I am going to the HD Pro Cam. I don't know. Is that any better?
No,
yes.
Is it?
It is better. Yeah.
I thought the other one was better.
Really?
Yeah. Wow. This one.
What does everybody think?
What do you think, guys?
This one.
Go back to the first one.
Now you sound like you're in a closet.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I'll go back to. Let me go back to the internal.
For everybody watching, we'll get the StreamYard thing figured out at some point.
Yeah, eventually. I don't know.
Now, try this. Turn your camera off.
And
I'm kidding. Don't turn your camera off.
You want me to turn the camera off?
I'm just trying to get rid of you. Jeez. All the problems.
I don't know. How is this? Is this any good?
Yeah.
Yeah? Good enough?
It'll work.
I'll go out and buy a mic if you want, but not now.
No, that's fine. All right, Ken, what's your picks?
Oh, now I'm disoriented. So I think I've talked about some of these albums in the past, so I'm not going to babble on about them too much. But for me, I started out originally listening, believe it or not, when I was around 14 or so. My parents bought me my first stereo, a little Sony console piece of shit. And I used to listen to the radio a lot. I used to listen to a lot of doo-wop music, 50s music, stuff like that. My sister had the worst taste in music. She used to just play shit that she wanted to impress her boyfriends with. So she was playing like Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, and which I've grown to appreciate, of course. But at the time, that and just playing Tom Paxton and Carole King and crap like that. And then I saw this guy on the Mike Douglas show, and that lit the fuse for me. So I saw Rick Wakeman. That was the beginning. I mean, it was just like a journey that's encompassed my life. It became my profession, and it became my obsession. And I didn't, and don't take anything I'm holding up literally. I mean, this was an important album for me, but this isn't like my all-time favorite album or anything like that. It's just the embodiment of progressive rock, which is my real passion. I listen to all kinds of progressive rock. I listen to Canterbury, symphonic, classically influenced prog, you name it, I absorb it, and there's very little of it that I don't like. So this is the overarching style of music that was the life changer for me. After that, there were other things that I liked, and I got into like heavy psychedelic music, anything like really guitar-driven hard rock. I got into Led Zeppelin very early. Got to see them in '77. My brother-in-law turned me on to Robin Trower. I was like, I saw Robin Trower '81, but at Deep Purple, love Scorpions Tokyo Tapes, one of my all-time favorite albums. Love that. And then I just started getting into like crazy shit, like hurdy-gurdy. I don't know if you guys know hurdy-gurdy. Bands like Guru Guru, Flower Traveling Band Satori, Blues Creation, T2, Cobus Jute. I mean, all kinds of stuff like that. And even today, I still like bands like Color Haze from Germany. You guys turned me on to Earthless. Very good. If it's heavy and it's guitar driven, it's a good chance I'm gonna dig it. So as long as the vocals are kind of tolerable. So after that, one thing I went down the rabbit hole, and I discovered jazz. And I discovered jazz. I talked about this the other day. I got into jazz through the back door. I started out listening to fusion, then jazz rock, what I call electric jazz, and then straight up jazz. And my preference is for modal jazz. And this is the first modal jazz album, Miles Davis, Kind of Blue, the biggest selling jazz album in history. And it's a landmark album. But I probably listen to as much jazz as I do prog rock these days. So, and it's been like that probably for the past 15, 20 years. I like anything from Duke Ellington Big Band of the 50s to avant-garde jazz. I don't really like free jazz at all. I'm not a big Sun Ra fan or anything like that. But I like contemporary stuff, like on the ECM label. But guys like, Freddie Hubbard, love Freddie Hubbard, Mal Waldron, great pianist. Even somebody like Shirley Horn, I'll listen to in a trio with Billy Hart. I listen to a lot of current jazz musicians. Guys like Pete, I turned you on to Matthew Halsall, who I think is amazing. Tamara Osborne, great British sax player. Chip Wickham, flute player. Nat Birchall, who kind of channels John Coltrane. And a lot of these guys make reference to the modal sounds of the 60s and the 70s. And that's an important part of my musical DNA these days. And I have these out of order. So the other thing, this was kind of hard because a lot of these, for me, because where I was having trouble with this was a lot of these genres, which are really important to me, they kind of overlap. And I started thinking about other things, and I started thinking about fusion. Fusion, I listened to a lot of fusion, and it kind of overlaps with a genre which has been called Cosmic Groove. And for me, Cosmic Groove is a phrase that was invented by a guy named Doug Watson, and here's what he calls Cosmic Groove: transgressive improvisational music which combines elements of psychedelia, spirituality, jazz, rock, soul, funk, and African, Latin, Brazilian, Indian, and Asian influences, culminating into an all-encompassing cosmic groove.
That's a lot of shit.
Everything under the sun, basically.
Kind of, yeah, to a degree. So, like, you start thinking about it. So, like, for example, this to me is an amazing record. I could have just as easily held up Bitches Brew, but this is by the Japanese band Air by Yuji Nomura. And this is a full-on electric Japanese ensemble that is clearly influenced by Bitches Brew. And Cosmic Groove is kind of an odd thing. It's just one of those things where it's hard to describe it, but you know it when you hear it. And like we were talking about those Japanese jazz albums last week, and a lot of that stuff would classify as Cosmic Groove. A lot of the fusion, Mahavishnu Orchestra, Return to Forever, Mwandishi, all of that's all Cosmic Groove. I listen to tons of that stuff. I mean, to me, that was life-changing because it's like it balances like that psychedelic element, the jazz element, electricity typically, but it doesn't have to be. It could be acoustic as well. So, spiritual jazz, Alice Coltrane. I listen to a lot of things like John Coltrane, Alice Coltrane, some of these newer guys like Matthew Halsall and Nat Birchall. They're exploring that sort of funky cosmic jazz. Very important to me. And then the last thing, which for me started kind of late, and was around around 95 or so, and that was I got into progressive metal, and you're just holding Zero Hour and an album that I worked on, and what happened was in the 90s prog rock really kind of sucked. There really wasn't there really wasn't a lot to listen to, and some of my customers around the mid to late 90s have started turning me on to some of these metal bands that had this progressive element. I got into Dream Theater a bit. I'd seen them, but then all these other European bands I was getting turned on to, and it was like a new world for me. It was heavy, which I always liked, and it had that complexity and that I always enjoyed from prog rock. And so it ultimately spurred me to start a prog metal label, which I have, Sensory. I put out 92 releases on the label. And, things like Spiral Architect, everybody knows that. Circus Maximus, Zero Hour. I love that balance of the heaviness, but the intelligence and the creativity and the complexity. And that's what I listen to day in, day out, all those things.
Good blend of stuff there. All right, Eric.
All right. Well, I'm going to admit I watched the Hudson Valley Squares because I wanted to get a good feel for what everybody did. I like that show. I really enjoyed it. But I'm going to cheat, and this will be a quick cheat, but I have to. This is not in my 5, so I'm doing an honorable mention before I do my 5. I would not be the obsessed music fan that I am without Kiss Alive. That was everything to me as a kid.
I think there's a few of us on this panel that would probably say the same thing.
Turn off his mic.
I honestly don't listen to them anymore or anything that I guess I would consider like that, but I'll throw that on a couple times a year and just get a kick out of it. But kind of put me on a path to just love music. So I felt like I had to say that one. And then to get us to this point, so I tried to think about what am I listening to right now? Because right now, I guess we're defining our taste, what we go through, and everyone's kind of mentioned that in theirs. But I feel bad because I feel like I'm doing a little copy of Jim Bakke, but I'm going with Jellyfish, Spilt Milk. And the reason why I'm picking this one is I love pop music. And this is probably going to be a repeat of exactly what Jim said. I love the 70s. I grew up on 70s radio. My parents played it. I played it all the time. You could only afford so many albums, right, in your collection. So you had the radio on. I love yacht rock, whatever you want to call it. I just was on vacation, and that's pretty much what I listened to that week. I think Jellyfish encompass. They've got Queen. They've got the Beatles. They've got 10cc. They've got just everything. Power pop. To me, they're like the pinnacle. And that's obviously the Beatles are. But honestly, that's a go-to for me. And if someone said, give me a great pop album, that's what I would hand them. And then as I'm thinking about other stuff, I'm thinking about, obviously, I always talk about, or mostly talk about instrumental music. So I think after I get this one out of the way, which everyone's seen from me 100,000 times, Happy the Man, Crafty Hands. And I think because that is probably the first record that I really was like, this is unbelievable. That was almost entirely instrumental. And since then, that's been one of the things I've really enjoyed. Now, as guitar, I had my guitar teacher who at that time just kept saying, this was in high school, you got to listen to Steve Morse. You got to listen to Steve Morse. I'm going to go with the introduction. It might not be my favorite in terms of the Dregs or Steve Morse, but it's a trio. It's guitar, bass, and drums, and you don't do better than Steve Morse. Just absolutely killer stuff on there, and that is just total guitar focus on that. As great as Jerry Peake is on bass and Rod Morgenstein, you want guitar, listen to that record. It's fantastic. With George's help and Ken's help, or at least Ken feeding my obsession and buying as much Fusion as I can, what I had to go to was I started thinking about, after the Steve Morse pick, what I really love. And I love guitar, but I also love violin. So I got to go with Jean-Luc Ponty, Enigmatic Ocean. That combination, you've got Holdsworth, a great band on that one. But the guitar and the violin combination, which you can hear in plenty of other bands and artists, but that one just sticks out to me. And being guitar focused, I got to throw in Holdsworth in there too. So, and my final one is obviously Prog, and I had to pick my favorite Prog band, so I'm going with Genesis, Trick of the Tail. I love Steve Hackett. I love Tony Banks. I love this entire band, and I think the reason why I would pick this one is I just feel like there's not a bad moment on this record. I love the record. Granted, there's a lot of other Genesis. I think anything from that 71, including Gabriel, so you have 71 up to whatever it is, 74, and then the first two with Phil. Everything, that probably was my starting point, or one of my starting points for Prog, but I've always gone back to Genesis no matter how much I can listen to any of those albums, probably at any time, as many times as I want, and I don't get tired of them. So if you want to go Nursery Crime through Wind and Wuthering, so be it. But Genesis had to be in that 5. So those are my 5.
Very cool. Some classic stuff there. All right, Chad.
All right, turn on the slides.
You got it.
All right, here we go. So my first one's going to be obvious, but it's got to be Rush's Moving Pictures. When I started listening to music, a lot of it was radio, and at the time we're talking early 80s, you're getting a lot of those Euro pop and one-hit wonders and all that. Then MTV comes around and you're getting videos for all the same stuff. Well, the pop radio wasn't playing Rush, but the rock radio was, but I wasn't listening to rock radio yet. So I'd be seeing Duran Duran and the Fix and all these other Euro bands, right? And then something like Tom Sawyer or Red Barchetta or Limelight comes on MTV, and it was such a different feel and vibe, and the music was so different. And this is what really took me down the path of, to steal from Eric, loving music, but really thinking or discovering that there's other ways to write a song. Meaning, the time signature changes, then the tempo changes, and the instrumentation, and how good these 3 guys were. And they were my gateway to some heavier stuff. Eventually, way down the road in the early 90s, they're the reason I discovered Dream Theater and some of that stuff. So they're easily my biggest definer and to this day my favorite band. Van Halen, Fair Warning. I could have put a couple Van Halen albums in here. It could have been the first one, could have been 1984, but Fair Warning's one I think I've listened to the most out of the David Lee Roth albums. Songs like Mean Streak and Unchained are just unrelenting hard rock. Eddie Van Halen's he's one of the masters. And this helped me get into things like checking out Led Zeppelin and checking out classic rock. And there's so many classic rock bands. AC/DC because of this. And to this day, really, the Van Halen catalog is high on my playlist. I still listen to a good amount of Van Halen. Next up would be I Wish You Were Here. I think at the same time I had a cassette One side was Dark Side, the other side Wish You Were Here. As much as I love both of them, I always gravitated towards Wish You Were Here. The long form of Shining You Crazy Diamond, really for me was the gem of that album. No pun intended. But loving like the spaciness and the emotional guitar of David Gilmour, and between this and Moving Pictures, I really started to learn more about how much talent was really out there in rock music. When you dig sort of into the more progressive stuff, that virtuosity really comes out. And so Pink Floyd had to be on there. I could have picked Dark Side, but if I wanted to define more of the sounds that I like, it's going to be with Wish You Were Here. Animals could have been on there too. Close to the Edge, kind of undeniable, but my entryway really to Yes was 90125, going back to that same early 80s era, MTV, seeing all those goofy production videos. But I decided one day to check out what else do they have, and I bought the cassette for Classic Yes. And for a compilation, it was pretty good. It gave you a pretty good sampling of some of their earlier stuff, some of the more well-known earlier stuff. And then I bought Fragile, and I loved Fragile. Played that to death. That could have easily been on here. But once I listened to Close to the Edge, and You and I knew from Classic Yes, Siberian Control smacked me in the face and has never let go. That is probably my favorite Yes song. But once I had to listen to Close to the Edge a lot. I wasn't used to a 20-minute song back then. Once I sort of got it, that was it. It's been my favorite Yes album ever since. So if I'm going to give someone, they would say, hey, give me a good progressive rock album to listen to, it's got to be Close to the Edge. And then my fifth one is my gateway drug to fusion. Back in late high school, college, I would go to a lot of record shows in King of Prussia, PA, and Wilmington. There were a bunch around here. And being a Yes fan, I started to look for other stuff. I looked for the UK album. I looked for, Chris Squire's solo album, a couple others, some of the Rick Wakeman stuff. And Bruford's One of a Kind was on my list. And one day I stumbled across a copy of it, used copy of One of a Kind. And first time I heard it, I loved it. It was something different. It was unlike anything else in my collection. And to this day, as much as I like fusion, and you guys have gotten me into a lot of cool stuff, I still like my fusion with a douse of rock. And this one checks every box for me. So that took me down the road eventually to a lot of this other stuff like Mahavishnu and Return to Forever and a lot of the other stuff you guys have introduced me to over the last few years. So prog rock, heavy rock, classic rock, some spacey stuff, some fusion. There's the defining moments.
I will tell you, I also like Wish You Were Here a little bit more than Dark Side.
Yeah.
I prefer Animals over both of them, but I think Wish You Were Here, to me anyway, maybe because it's not as overplayed as Dark Side, but I think Wish You Were Here still sounds pretty fresh.
Oh, yeah.
All right, George. Well, before we go to George, any questions for Chad's picks or anything else we've heard so far?
No, I don't think
you want to see Sammy? Speaking of Van Halen, are you going to see that tour this
No,
summer?
I'm not going to that actually. I'm curious. I'll be watching YouTube for people who put clips up, but no, I'm not going to that. But I am going to see Sarah McLachlan on Wednesday. I know you're all jealous.
Yeah, that's exactly what we are.
Hey, that's a good date night. Don't knock it.
Yeah.
I like Sarah McLachlan.
She puts on a good live show. In all honesty.
I don't know if I did it good. I tried to do slides. Do you see it, Pete?
Yeah, hold on. I'll get it up for you here, George. Here we
So,
go.
yeah. First one is Boston. The mid 70s. I'm like it's been mentioned a couple times. I'm a kid of FM radio, big time. And my mom is a 45 collector. So I'm like a lot of people still are today. I'm very singles oriented, but I have a couple of babysitters that live upstairs and they're like the cool couple and they are album oriented. And the album that was big at the time was Boston. And they introduced me to the whole concept of the way I still listen to music. I'm very album based. I don't shuffle. I rarely playlist, so I'm very album based. And this album I feel like was one, well, for me, it was the first album where I was introduced to the B-sides, the deep tracks, the fact that there was more stuff out there than whatever the 2 or 3 songs that FM was playing, and I saw the value in that, and that has kept up all the way to today. So that was important.
My first concert.
So
Nice.
around this time, I have another babysitter. He's like an older, cool kid, like a pothead kind of guy. And I'm over at his house hanging out with these dudes. And this is just when British Steel came out. So I knew Living After Midnight from the radio. And there I see other albums by Priest there. So the one that I see this and I see Hellbent for Leather. So I asked him to put this on. And man, I was just blown away. Like, this is so much better than that song on the radio. Like, this is incredible,
Sure is.
And Priest along with Sabbath is the first band that I start collecting music around 1980. That's the first band that I discog dive on, along with Rush and Van Halen. But the major one that I didn't really know anything about until then, and then I discog dive, it was Priest. But I never found one I liked more than this one. So that's my number 2. So right around this time, I'm also into Rush, and I start realizing I don't remember a particular moment, but I start realizing that I have an interest in drums. And of course, it's driven by this guy, Neil Peart. I noticed the reaction that other people had when we're listening to Rush, the air drumming and the happiness that he brought to people, and I just like the sound of it. So I determined at that point that I definitely wanted to play drums. It took me like 4 years to talk my mom into getting me a kit, but I was definitely sold when I heard this album, especially really drove it in. The drum sound is so killer. All the songs are great. It really it formed a very formulative for me, the whole drum angle. This one, I had a gypsy family that lived across the street from me, and they got a kick out of me being a Rush head. And, I was a cocky Rush head. Oh, they're the greatest players, whatever. And they're like, let me show you some stuff. So they play me Al Di Meola Live was the first one they played me. They're like, you like that drummer? Listen to this drummer. So then they start playing me, the other solo albums of RTF, and then RTF Maine, and right around a little bit later, I'm at a lake party and somebody put this album on, and I was just like totally taken aback. Couldn't believe it. It had that little bit of prog in it, but it was playing well beyond any prog I've ever still heard. So that is to this day, that's what I listen to the most, and it all starts with this album. The last one is my prog side. I'm listening to Rush, and I got introduced to Yes in the mid 80s also, but I never really took it further than that. Nobody showed me all those other 70s prog bands. My friends, either they weren't into them or they didn't show me. I don't know. I didn't get introduced to those bands at the time. I'm listening to Fate's Warning and Queensryche, but I never took them as really prog like that. But when I heard this album, I was like, this is it. This is metal meets prog, not Fate's Warning, not Queensryche, not Voivod. I had heard Voivod. This, for me, really locked it in that this is Yes meets Metallica. And that was so up my alley. Couldn't be any more up my alley. So that is obviously very formative, because prog for me is more prog metal than prog rock by a mile. So, and this was the starting point. This is the cornerstone album. So this was my last one.
So George, you had this one before Images and Words came out?
Yes.
Wow, it's great.
I was in the record store to pick up the new Apocrypha album, and I pick up a magazine, and we had the magazines in front. I pick up this magazine, and the back cover is a full-page ad for fans of Rush and Queensryche. I said, well, I don't really like Rush that much anymore, but I like Queensryche. Let me go to the rack and get this thing. And I brought it home, and it was like, boom.
Whoa.
Yeah, this is it.
These dudes from Long Island, right?
I have a question for George. George, since the statute of limitations is running out, do you have any good babysitter stories?
No, I wish.
Out of that.
She was super hot, too, but no, nothing there.
I was thinking about the guy.
No.
All right, Lewis.
Okay. So I took a slightly different route to this. I decided to be very literal and just decide what was it that I listened to that sort of set me on the path of being a music lover and a listener and a musician. Right. So I think, and I'm going to have to, there will be some double dipping, but only because they came as cassettes. So a thing of my background, I couldn't afford as a kid to buy albums that much. So in order to be able to hear more music, I had to buy bootleg Memorex 90-minute tapes with one album per side outside the subway station. That's how I started to listen to stuff. So a definite album or a cassette really that I just listened to over and over and over. And you got to remember, I didn't know who played in these records. I didn't know what the covers looked like. I didn't know anything. I just had the name of the band and the title written by a Mexican. Right? So it was a little rough. But the first one would have to be a tape that had Gentle Giant in a Glass House. And the other side was Jethro Tull, Thick as a Brick. I cannot tell you. I played it so much that the tape finally just broke. But to me, that was a very formative tape for sure. But then, aside from that, I didn't really listen to a lot of what people would call prog at all. I mean, I was very, very impressed by Black Sabbath. And, you know, the album that really got to me was, because it was the first one I heard, was Paranoid. Paranoid was an LP that one of my cousins had, and he just played it for me in his apartment, and I was just stupefied by that record. And then when I finally was able to get some cash, I went to the store to try to buy Black Sabbath, and what they had was fucking Mob Rules, which was nothing like Paranoid, but it was also amazing, you know. So, you know, there was that. I would have to also say that the very, very first record I bought, you know, vinyl, was really a game changer for me. That was Deep Purple and Rock. That record is just so fucking beautiful. It has balls bigger than my head, and it is just incredible. I love everything about that record. To me, it's perfect. The old vinyl, because then the CD is different. I mean, the old vinyl had that little intro before Speed King, and it was just really great. And I at that time, I also didn't really think of labels or genres. I just thought of, this is great and this sucks. So I would listen to Deep Purple and Rock, and I thought, this is great. I would go to school, and people were listening to fucking Culture Club, and I thought, well, that sucks. Or Kiss. No offense, but fuck that shit. And I even to this day, I still get into fucking Ubers or taxis, and they play Kiss. And it's either
as they should.
No, it's either Charisma or I Was Made for Loving You, Baby,
Ooh.
which both are extraordinary examples of how much that band sucks and how much I hate them. Anyway, my number 4 would have to be, this is a dead heat. I didn't know which one because I discovered them both pretty much at the same time because the same cousin that showed me Sabbath gave me the 2 LPs to play at home. And I'm talking about Pink Floyd Animals, which truly, that record is about as good of a prog rock record as I think anybody can make, without talking about, the John Anderson universe and all that other shit. I think this was a fantastic record. It's dark, but it's also spacey, and there's a light to the darkness in Animals, which is subtle, but it's there. But the other one was The Wall. We've talked about The Wall before. You guys know that was a major thing. I had seen the movie before already, but hadn't heard the album. So having the album changed it completely and definitely defined my taste. Now you'll notice I haven't mentioned Zappa or Rush or Crimson, because all that stuff came later. In fact, when I first heard Zappa around that time, my 12-year-old brain, I played, the Grand Wazoo, and I just said, nope, that didn't happen. It just scared the shit out of me. It intimidated me. I'm going to pretend like this doesn't exist. Because I could formulate music of the kind that I heard at the time. And I could imagine playing it, and I could imagine imagining it and writing my own version of something like that. But Zappa was in a different universe. So that was like, nope, that's not real. Let's just move the fuck on. And of course, my number 1 would have to be the Who Quadrophenia.
I was waiting for that.
To me is the most perfect hard rock album ever made. Again, I grew up in a place where there were very strict rules about listening to the stereo. So I had to negotiate with a kind of psychotic, violent grandmother, and I had to get myself a pair of headphones from somebody, and then she would get pissed off because I would spend so many hours sitting in front of the stereo with the headphones. So she just didn't like me listening to music. But I did get a copy of Quadrophenia through a lot of effort, and I literally wore it out. Like it was just, it started not playing properly after some time. So those would be what defined. And then there's a lot of stuff that happened later. I didn't really listen to prog rock or jazz or fusion until I was in the 90s and doing my PhD in Maryland. I was not, I wasn't as avid a music fan as I am now, but I think those things really sort of got me going. There's only 2 other mentions. They're less important, but they were very important. One would be, and this is funny, but it's true, is Genesis 3 Sides Live. I still contend to this day that combo of Turn It On Again, Dodo, and Abacab is as good as anything they ever did in concert. And I know that the prog heads are going to say I'm a fucking idiot. I don't give a shit. That is amazing. And Chester Thompson plays the fuck out of those drums. It's just a great, great side. And the other one, of course, I have to mention it, is Iron Maiden Live After Death. However, to my ears, it seemed to me like Iron Maiden was really borrowing heavily from Jethro Tull. Like if you think of Thick as a Brick has a lot of those 12/8s that Steve Harris made a career on, those galloping triplets. So to my way of thinking, these guys just took Thick as a Brick, did it a lot heavier, and they added an amazing singer, which is not little, but it just didn't seem that innovative at first. But of course, I'm a Maiden head. I love Iron Maiden, and I played that record to death. So those things together, I think, is what opened the door for me to later be able to appreciate other things. But there wasn't much prog in what I listened to early. or jazz. I mean, in the house, they listen to a lot of classical music. But this is actually the house I grew up in. This is my mother's study. So for people who want to, I can show you how weird it gets by just taking this thing, and I'm going to flip it so you can see her work desk. Okay. I'm sitting here because the modem is right there. Just check this stuff out. There's a book written in Hebrew, and it gets funky. So, but my mother listened to a lot of classical music at a very low volume. So there was always like a hum of classical music in my memory. But that also sort of worked in some way. But it's the other stuff that I really gravitated towards. And also because I knew that all those records really pissed off my grandmother. That was very important for me. So that's it.
And I will say Mr. Steve Harris is a big Jethro Tull fan. I'm sure he would readily admit that Iron Maiden took lots of inspiration from classic.
That wouldn't surprise me at all. And I don't. I love Maiden. I respect the shit out of Steve Harris. But my first impression was this is like a heavier version of Tull. This is that's where my brain went.
And no flute.
No flute, of course, just
no flute.
A twin guitar attack and
yeah. All right, Pete, give us your 5.
All right, so folks already who watched the Hudson Valley Squares episode already know this, but I'll give you the 5 that I discussed there. Real quick, Black Sabbath, Master of Reality. I listen to so much doom and stoner music, and it all goes back to Sabbath, and it all goes back to Master of Reality. I mean, I have other albums by them I love, but these days that's probably my favorite. But it's just the blueprint for so much other stuff that I listen to. I love big, heavy, massive riffs. Just me. I just love that kind of guitar style too. I'm going to throw in here too. I didn't include them in my 5 on the Hudson Valley Squares episode, but I got to throw Deep Purple here also. I love the combination of heavy Hammond organ and heavy guitar. Yes. And that all goes back to Deep Purple. You know, Deep Purple, Uriah Heep. There's a million other bands I listen to that have that kind of style. I guess you can include in rock here or Machine Head or Fireball or Burn. It doesn't really matter. It's just, to me, just Deep Purple and Sabbath are so responsible for so many other things that I listen to. So I have to include both of them here. Return to Forever, Romantic Warrior, just like George picked. I mean, that to me, there are other fusion albums I listened to before. I mean, I could easily say the first Mahavishnu Orchestra album could be that, could be a spark for me. Love and Fusion. The first time I heard Bitches Brew, and first time I heard the Dixie Dregs and Alan Holdsworth and all that. But I think like Romantic Warrior to me is the reason I love fusion so much is that band. There's just something just absolutely perfect about that lineup specifically. I like the Billy Connors lineup a lot too. But something about those guys together on that album is just so perfect sounding. And I know when I hear other fusion bands who do something similar, I love that because of my love for Romantic Warrior and Return to Forever. So there's that. Genesis Nursery Crime. It's not my favorite Genesis album. I have other prog albums that I like more. Right, I could have picked Close to the Edge, but something about early Genesis and specifically that album just has everything that I love about progressive rock, right? And like I said on the Hudson Valley Squares episode, you can't go wrong when you got an album where some guy with a really unique voice is singing about hogweeds and musical boxes and all that kind of stuff, and you got this weird guitar playing from this guy named Steve Hackett and great drumming, and it's atmospheric, it's weird, it's quirky. It's just everything I love about prog rock is right there in the Nursery Crime. Opeth Ghost Reveries. Again, it's not my favorite Opeth album, but Opeth basically, they weren't the first band that I got into that was doing like extreme music, because I was listening to lots of thrash and even early death metal like Death and some other, and Possessed back in the 80s. So they weren't the first extreme band that I got into, but they were really the first band after like the 90s were over and done with, and I was investigating mostly prog rock and not listening to a lot of metal. They were one of the bands that got me back into metal again, and then just really embracing extreme metal. But what I love so much about them is because they incorporated prog rock into their form of death metal, and they utilize all these folk passages and hard rock and prog. And Michael Ackerfeld is such a fan of like 70s obscure music, and I just love that about him. And I found all of a sudden it's like, well, you know what, I can get into these death metal growls because there's regular great singing, melodic singing here, and there's acoustic guitars and big riffs and crazy complicated stuff and mellotrons and all this other stuff. So and Ghost Reveries just has, again, it's not my favorite Opeth album, but it's got like everything I like about that style of music all wrapped up into one album. And then last but not least, I love guitar. I love guitar music. I love tons of guitar players, but I have to go back to the guy that really made me want to play guitar, and the guy that really got me into listening to bands or artists specifically to hear the guitar, although he had a great singer too, and that's Robin Trower, and it's Robin Trower live. I remember when I saw that in the store, I had no idea who Robin Trower was, because back then, this is like the late 70s. I had no clue who he was, you know, other than Bridge of Sighs on the radio. You weren't hearing Robin Trower anywhere, but I saw that album cover with this guy with a Stratocaster playing in front of a stadium full of people, and I was like, this has got to be good, right? And it was absolutely amazing. And it's just this, I love this whole kind of like psychedelic hard rock and blues kind of meeting there, the way he does that, and his playing has just captivated me to this day. But again, he inspired me to go out and really start listening to other guys who were doing this guitar first thing. Pat Travers, Gary Moore, Jeff Beck, the list goes on and on and on and on. But I owe it all to Trower. And, you know, even though he took tons of inspiration from Hendrix, and I love Hendrix, I always had a really, really special place for Robin Trower. So I think he's the guy who really prompted me to take that bass that my parents bought me initially and say, all right, that's cool, but I want to do what this guy is doing. I want to get an electric guitar, and I want to play this type of music and want to listen to more of this type of music. So there you have it. Those are mine. Anybody have any questions for anybody's picks? Is there anything that you're surprised you didn't see today in this episode?
I was surprised that Ken didn't pick any ELP.
No, well, I held up the Rick Wakeman because it was the first album, and I made a point of saying that it's just sort of emblematic of progressive rock. I could have held up an ELP album. ELP is my favorite band, but it was Rick Wakeman for me that really got the whole thing started. In fact, I had a friend who lent me an Emerson, Lake and Palmer, the first Emerson, Lake and Palmer album. She said, "Oh, you like this? Well, you'll like this." And I didn't really like it very much because it was very dark and it wasn't symphonic. You know, it was just three of them, whereas, you know, the Journey to Center of the Earth was this sort of epic, you know, orchestral thing with all the crazy synthesizers and stuff. And I didn't get into ELP till a little later on. But yeah, I could have held up any album. I listened to so much different prog rock, and I love it all. So, you know.
Oh yeah, I think that, you know, if you ask me what are my favorites, like I didn't mention Universe Zero, none of the stuff that really. Yeah. But it was just like what got me into listening to music.
Right. Yeah. For me, actually, it was that Rick Wakeman album. I'm telling you, I mean, I was 14, 15 years old. I used to listen to comedy albums. I used to listen to Robert Klein comedy albums, and you know, I went to see my first concert was Sha Na Na. So wow, yeah, I mean, yeah, with Bowser. That was my first real concert at St. John's University. I used to listen to doo-wop music on WCBS FM, and then, you know, I discovered this guy with a cape and long blonde hair on the Mike Douglas show, and it like totally freaked me out. You know, like, what the hell is a synthesizer? He's making all these crazy noises. And then I had my sister take me to Sam Goody's, and I bought that damn album. I think it was $7.98, and my parents were appalled. And you know, and I think they held it against my sister, you know, to the very end that she bought me that album.
I'm surprised Led Zeppelin didn't show up on anybody's five.
Yeah, pretty close for me. They're in the discussion. Maybe,
Yeah, I mean,
maybe
when I
not.
was talking about like heavy psych and stuff, Zeppelin was like a very important part of that. Houses of the Holy, and all this.
This is
At
an
that
interesting
age,
exercise. It really
at
is.
that age, we were absorbing so much stuff. I mean, and seeking out so many different sounds. For me at least, I was all over the place. I was listening to everything.
Yeah, I mean, Zeppelin for me came a little bit later. Like my brain was already synchronized to Sabbath and Deep Purple.
I didn't get into Sabbath till later. I was afraid.
Yeah,
So I used to hear stories about people trying to set fire to Madison Square Garden, and I was like afraid to go see him.
Led Zeppelin, Hendrix, and the Doors came like in a second wave. I was really into the Doors. I liked I didn't like the hits, but I love the song "Not to Touch the Earth."
Oh, it's a great song.
And that was the thing. They were dark, and they were just weird. And then they were also fluffy and shitty. So you never knew what you got. But I kind of liked the Doors a lot a long time ago.
The Doors are an interesting band because they had when you really look at it, they had so many hits. But even beyond the hits, they have so many great songs.
I hate the Doors.
I know a lot of people who hate the Doors.
Yeah. I mean, I fucking love them, and
I do too. Yeah,
it's great stuff.
Yeah.
And then I never really listened to. I mean, that was another thing when I was thinking about this. I don't know how you guys feel about it, but I thought also, kind of what defines your taste are the things you don't like, the things you gravitate away from, right? The things that push you in one direction because they're so repellent, right?
You mean like Kiss?
Kiss was one for me, but also that was the time of it was also the time of disco, right? I hated disco, and there were lots of. I mean, nowadays I can listen to a disco song and appreciate the bass line and the production values and all that, but at the time I just thought it was incredibly lame, and all those like ballady artists, like I don't even know what they're called, but there were lots of bands that are cool, but they were just kind of clones of each other, like Bread in America and all these things that I would hear on the radio that it just didn't work for me. They were too soft. And none of the bands that I liked were ever played on the radio in Mexico. None. So the radio was like a good way for me to know what to stay away from.
true.
It made me not want to be in that whole thing, which made for a lonely childhood, but it was great when I was at home listening to stuff, So
And then when you're old enough to know better, you realize a lot of the really, really great stuff they weren't playing on the radio.
Exactly. So no complaints.
Yeah, for sure.
I find it interesting how people's taste evolves over the years. How things that I like now, I couldn't imagine having listened to or having any interest in when I first started listening to music. I mean, if you would have played me, let's say, a Miles Davis album in 1976, I'd be like, what the fuck is this shit? Take this off.
Yeah.
For sure. So there you have it, everybody. 5 albums each of albums that define our tastes in music. So if you didn't play along back, a month or so ago on the Hudson Valley Squares, or maybe you don't watch that show, but you watch this show, post your picks down in the comments below. Remember, it doesn't have to be prog. The whole point of doing this is it could be any kind of music, right? And we've seen all sorts of flavors here tonight. So put them down in the comments, and we'll see you next time here on In the Prog Seat. Visit us on the web at www.seaoftranquility.org. We're on Facebook. We're on YouTube all together. All the time. Please subscribe if you haven't already and click on that notification bell so you get alert of all of our content as it posts. And please do hit the like button before you leave. For Louis Nasser, Eric Porter, Ken Golden, Chris Canzaneri, Chad Hutchinson, George Lemmy, I am P. Pardo. See you next time here from the Proggers. Take care. Bye-bye.